Hello, hi everyone. So we are now in the chapter 6, okay, the organization of the firm, the organization of the firm. So in chapter 5, we saw how a manager can select the mix of input that minimizes the cost of production. However, our analysis in that chapter left unresolved two important questions. First, what is the optimal way to acquire this efficient mix of input? The second, how can the owners of a firm ensure that workers put forth the maximum effort consistent with their capabilities? So in this chapter, we addresses these two issues. As you can see from this slide, okay, uh, this graph. Okay. It's illustrate why it is important to resolve these two issues, two questions. The cost function define the minimum possible cost of producing each level of output. Point A correspond to the situation where a firm has cost in excess of the minimum cost necessary to produce a given level of output. At point A, 10 units of output are being produced for a total cost of $100. Notice that this cost is greater than $80, which is the minimum cost necessary to produce 10 units of output. Even if the firm has the right mix of input, if it did not obtain them efficiently or if workers are not expending the maximum effort consistent with their capabilities, the firm's cost will be higher than the minimum possible cost. So in this chapter, we consider techniques a firm can use to ensure that it is operating on cost function, I mean point B in this figure, and not above it. At point A, we begin with discussing three methods managers can use to obtain input needed in production, okay, such as spot exchange, contracts, and vertical integration. To minimize cost, a firm must not only use all input efficiently. Okay. The MRTS KL equal to W divided by R rule discussed in the chapter 5. So it must use the least cost method of obtaining the input. So we will explain when it is optimal to acquire input. First, we have spot exchange by writing contract with input suppliers, or by producing the input within the firm, vertical integration. Thus, the first part of this chapter provides manager with the information needed to acquire a given set of input in the optimal manner. So the second part of the chapter examines how a firm can ensure that labor input, including both managers and workers, put forth the maximum effort consistent with their capabilities. So this is an important consideration because conflict of interest often arise among workers, managers, and firms owner. For example, the manager may wish to spend the firm's resources on plush office, carpeting, or corporate jets, while the owner prefer that the fund be invested to increase profit, which accrue to them by virtue of their status as owners. Or workers may wish to spend most of their day gossiping in the lunchroom instead of working. So when employees and owners have conflicting interests, a principal agent problem is said to exist. So we will see how manager and worker compensation plans can be constructed to ensure that all employees put forth their highest level of effort. So we will touch all of this, okay, based on the scenario that we discussed just now. Okay, method of procuring input, transaction cost, optimal procurement input, and principal agent problem. So as you can see from here that this is a manager's role in perspective of economists, that how that we can uh, resolve that's our two issues before to procure input in the least cost manners like point B and A, as I discussed just now. Okay, so a manager can use several approaches to obtain the input needed to produce a final product. So consider the manager of a car rental company. One input needed to produce output rental cars is automobile servicing, like tune up, oil changes, lube job, and the like. So the manager has three options: simply take a car to a firm that service automobile and pay the market price for the services. Second, maybe sign a contract with a firm that service automobile, and then when a service is needed, pay the price negotiated in the contract for that particular service. Or maybe the third one, create within the firm a division that service automobile. So each of these method of servicing automobile generally will imply different cost function for producing car rental services. So the manager's job is to choose the method that minimizes cost. Before we examine how to determine the best method of acquiring a given type of input, it is useful to provide a broad overview of a few methods, as you can see from here. Okay, spot exchange, contracts, and then vertical integration. Okay, the first one is a spot exchange. This is the first method. Okay, for us to get or to procuring input. So one method of acquiring input is to use spot exchange. Spot exchange occurs when the buyers and sellers of an input meet, exchange, and then go their separate ways. So if the managers of a car rental company simply takes a car to one of many firms that provide automobile service and pay for the services, so the manager has used spot exchange to obtain automobile servicing. Okay. So with the spot exchange, buyers and sellers essentially are anonymous. The parties may take an exchange without even knowing each other's names, and there is no formal or legal relationship between buyers and sellers. Okay, and then the second method, okay, when we acquire input under a contract. So a contract is a legal document. Yeah? So it's a legal formal relationship or legal document that creates an extended relationship between a particular buyer and seller of an input. So it is specify the terms under which they agree to exchange over a given time horizon, say 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. For example, the manager of a car rental firms might choose to formalize a relationship with a particular firm that service automobile by signing a contract. So such contract specify the range of service covered, the price of each service, and the hour during which the car will be serviced. So as long as the service requirement for automobile are understood beforehand, the parties can address all the important issues in the written contract. So however, if the number of service needed during the term of contract is very large, or if some type of unanticipated breakdowns occurs, so the contracts may be incomplete. So contract is incomplete if, for example, a car needs a new transmission that contract does not specify the price at which the servicing firm will provide this service. So of course, this open the door to a dispute between the two parties regarding the price of the service needed but not spelled out in the contract. Okay, so this is the second method for manager to get or to procure the inputs. Okay, it's a legal document normally between buyer and seller. And then another method for procuring input is a vertical integration. Okay, So manager may choose to produce the input needed to production within the firm. Okay. In this situation, the manager of a car rental company dispense with outside service firm entirely. So she set up a facility to service the automobile fleet with her own employees as a service personnel. So the firm thus bypasses the service market completely and does the work itself. So when a firm shuns other suppliers and choose to produce an input internally, it has engaged in what we call as a vertical integration. Okay? As a vertical integration. So there are some features, okay, as explained before. Yes, pawn exchange. Got a specialization, avoid contracting cost, avoid cost of vertical integration, possible hold up problem. Okay, and then contracting still specialized. Okay, reduce opportunism. Okay, avoid skimping on specialized investment, and costly in complex environments. Okay, and then vertical integration reduces opportunism, and then avoid contracting costs. So you have your own workers and your own fleets for service your car rental. Then loss specialization and may increase organizational cost, because you have to cover from develop your own service workshop, for example, and then to maintain your workers, to train them. So when a firm acquire an input, it may incur costs in excess of an actual amount paid to the input supplier. So these costs are known as a transaction cost and play a crucial role in determining optimal input procurements. Okay. So the transaction cost of acquiring an input are the cost of locating a seller of the input. So negotiating a price at which the input will be purchased and putting the input to use. Okay. So that's why it is will includes the cost of searching for a supplier willing to sell a given input, and then the cost of negotiating a price at which the input will be purchased. So this cost may be in terms of opportunity cost of time, legal fees, and so forth. And then other investment and expenditure required to facilitate exchange. Okay. So many transaction costs are obvious. For example, if an input supplier charge a price of $10 per unit but require you to furnish your own trucks and drivers to pick up the input. So the transaction cost to your firm include the cost of the truck and the personnel needed to deliver the input to your plant. So clearly the relevant price of the input to your firm includes not only the $10 per unit but also the transaction cost of getting the input to your plant. So some important transaction costs, however, are less obvious. To understand these hidden transaction costs, we must distinguish between transaction costs that are specific to a particular trading relationship and those that are general in nature. Okay. So the key to this distinction is the notion of a specialized investment. The key to this distinction is the notion of a specialized investment. Okay. So specialized investment is simply an investment in a particular exchange that cannot be recovered in another trading relationship. For example, suppose that to ascertain to the quality of bulls it is necessary to spend $100 on a machine that tests the bolt strength. So if the machine is useful only for testing a particular manufacturer's bolt, and the investment is in the machine is a sunk and therefore non-recoverable cost, it is a specialized investment. So in contrast, if the machine can be resold and its purchase price or used to test the quality of bolt produced by other firms, so it does not represent a specialized investment. Okay. So you can see these types of specialized investments, specificity, okay, physical asset specificity, okay, dedicated assets and human capital. Okay, this is types of specialized investment, and it's lead to higher transaction costs because costly bargaining, under investment, okay, opportunism, and the whole up problem is there. So when specialized investment are required to facilitate an exchange, the resulting relationship between the parties is known as a relationship specific exchange. Okay? So the distinguishing feature of relationship specific exchange is that the two parties are tied together because of the specific investment meant to facilitate exchange between them. So as we will see, this feature often creates transaction cost due to the sunk nature of the specific investment. Okay. So before we examine how specialized investment affect transaction cost and the optimal between the acquiring input, it is important to recognize that specialized investment occur in many forms. As you can see from here is site specificity. This site specificity means occurs when the buyer and the seller of an input must locate their plant close to each other to be able to engage in exchange. For example, electrical power plant often locate close to the particular coal mine to minimize the transaction cost of obtaining coal. And then physical asset specificity. This physical asset specificity refer to a situation where the capital equipment needed to produce an input is designed to meet the needs of a particular buyer and cannot be readily adapted to produce input needed by the buyer. Okay. For example, if producing a lawn mower engine require a special machine that is useful only for producing engine for a particular buyer. So the machine is a specific physical asset, specific physical asset for producing the engines. Okay. And then dedicated asset. Okay. Dedicated asset are generally investment made by a firm that allow it to exchange with a particular buyer. For example, suppose a computer manufacturer opens a new assembly line to enable it to produce enough computer for a large government purchaser. So if opening the new assembly line is profitable, yeah, only if the government actually purchases the firm's computers and the investment represent a dedicated asset. And then human capital is a fourth type of specialized investment. Okay, in many employment relationship, workers must learn specific skill to work for a particular firm. So if these skills are not useful or transferable to other employers, they represent a specialized investment. Okay. And then as you can see from here, okay, specialized investment got some implication in terms of costly bargaining in situation where transaction costs are low and desired input is of uniform quality and sold by many firms. So the price of the input is determined by the forces of supply and demand. Okay, so when specialized investment are not required to facilitate exchange, very little time is expended negotiating a price. So the scenario differ, however, if specialized investment are required to obtain the input. Okay. And then another complication or implication in terms of specialized investment is under investment. You can see from here, okay, when specialized investment are required to facilitate exchange, the level of specialized investment often is lower than the optimal level. To see this, suppose the specialized investment is human capital. Yeah? So to work for a particular firm, a worker must first invest his own time in learning how to perform some tasks. If the workers perceive that he may not work at the firm for a long time due to be laid off or accepting another job, he or she will not invest as heavily in learning the task as he otherwise would. So for example, if you plan to transfer to another university at the end of the semester, so you will not invest very heavily in learning how to use the library facilities at your present university. So the investment in learning about the library facility is an investment in human capital specific to your present university and will have little value at another university with a completely different library setup. So similar problem exists with other types of specialized investment. For example, if an input supplier must invest in a specific machine to produce an input used by particular buyer, let's say physical asset specificity. So the supplier may invest in a cheaper machine that produce an input of inferior quality. So this is because the supplier recognizes that the machine will not be useful if the buyer decide to purchase from another firm, in which case the supplier will be stuck with an expensive machine it cannot use. So thus specialized investment may be lower than optimal, resulting in higher transaction cost because the input produced of is inferior quality. Yeah? And then another problem that may occur in specialized investment. Okay, so you can see from here the opportunism and the whole up problem. Opportunism and whole up problem. Okay, so when a specialized investment must be made to acquire an input, the buyer or seller may attempt to capitalize on the sunk nature of the investment by engaging in opportunism. To be concrete, suppose the buyer of an input must make a specific investment of $10, let's say. So the cost of verifying the quality of a particular supply input, the manager knows there are many firms willing to sell the input at a price of $100. So she goes to one of them at random and spend $10 inspecting the input. So once she has paid this $10, okay, so the supplier attempt to take advantage of the specialized investment and behave in an opportunistic manners. So its attempt to hold up, that's the hold up problem. The manager by asking for a price, let's say $109, so $9 more than the price charged by all other suppliers. So since the manager has already spent $10 inspecting this firm's input, she is better off paying the $109 than spending an additional let's say $10 inspecting another supplier's input. Okay, so make them more cost, make her more cost. Okay, that's opportunism and hold up problem example. Okay, okay, this is showing us the specialized investment and contract lengths. Okay, the marginal cost due to greater need for specialized investment. okay, from marginal benefit 0 to marginal benefit 1, okay, due to greater need for specialized investment. Okay, so marginal cost will increase, longer contract will happen, okay, from length 1, okay, to length 0 to length 1. So this is a specialized investment and contract length relationship, okay. And this also showing us the specialized investment and contract lengths, when we see more complex contracting environment, okay, more complex contracting environments, okay. And then this is a line for marginal benefit, yeah. For shorter contract, maybe we can get this point of marginal cost, marginal cost too, okay. This is only the concept when we see the example in figure, so more clear when we see here. So marginal benefits on this line, okay, and that's when happen less complex contracting environment, okay. That means in this we can see, in situation for the longer contract, where the point is will be, okay. So now we will examine how the manager should acquire input in such a way as to minimize costs. So still remember, right? So our organizations, one of our organization goal is to increase as much as possible, as high as possible, the profit of our organization. To get that objective, to achieve that objective, of course, one of the common way for us is to minimize the cost. So the cost minimizing method will depend on the extent to which there is a relationship specific exchange, okay. For example, in this figure, okay, easily you can see the relationship between the how to get uh, that's specific exchange, For example, a substantial specialized investment relative to contracting costs. If no, we have to do the spot exchange, and then if yes, a complex contracting environment relative to cost of integration. Okay, this is the question when we see, okay, and then the relation. If no, we go to contract, and then if yes, maybe manager can choose the method for input to get the input procurement by vertical integration, okay. Okay, that's a very clear, and then I think very simple for us to understand when we want to get the input for procurement, okay. There are some methods, okay, and then we have to consider some of the advantage and disadvantage of those methods, Okay, now we continue with okay, what you can see from here, the managerial problem, problems between principals and agent, as we discussed just now. Sometimes the owner of principal, normally referred to as a owner, okay, uh, will prefer a different decision, okay, a different step compared to the agents or manager, or the workers, okay. So you now know the principal factors in selecting the best method of acquiring input. So our remaining task in this chapter is to explain how to compensate labor input to ensure that they put forth their best effort. Okay, maybe in other subject like human resource management, we can see they will suggest a few suggestion for us to manage our human resource or our workers. And the principal agent problems is occur when the principal cannot observe the effort of the agent. So it occurs when principal cannot observe the effort of the agent. For example, shareholders or principal cannot observe the effort of the manager or agent in this case. Or maybe manager can be a principal, cannot observe the effort of worker as an agent. And then principal cannot determine whether a bad outcome was a result of agent's low effort or due to bad luck. That's the main problem, okay, between principal and agent. Okay, so managers must recognize the existence of principal agent problem and devise plan to align the interests of workers with that of the firm. So shareholders must create plan to align the interests of manager with those of the shareholders. Okay, so the point here is to find the best solution between to get a win-win situation between principal and agent. Okay, this is some suggestion. Okay, some suggestion to solve the problem between owners and managers or principals and agent. For example, internal incentive like incentive contract. Incentive contract, typically the chief executive officer of a corporation receive a stock option and other bonuses directly related to the to profit. So it may be tempting to argue that a CEO who earn over $1 million per year is receiving excessive compensation. So what is important, however, is how the executive earn the $1 million. So if the earnings are due to largely to a performance bonus, so it could be a big mistake to reduce the executive compensation. Okay. So this incentive contract, this point is important because the media often imply that it is unfair to heavily reward CEOs of major corporations. So remember, however, that performance-based reward benefits stockholders as well as CEOs. So and reducing such reward may result in declining profit for the firm. So this is uh, the first, okay, internal incentive. We can use incentive contract. Okay, incentive contract. And then another option we can use to solve the problem between owners and manager is external incentive. External incentive. Okay, let's say for example personal reputation, potential for takeover. Okay, so for reputation, manager have increased job mobility when they can demonstrate to other firm that they have the managerial skill needed to maximize profit. So it is costly to be an effective manager. Many hours have must be spent supervising workers and planning production outlays. So this cost represent an investment by manager in a reputation for being an excellent manager. So in the long run, this reputation can be sold at a premium in the market for managers. So where other firms compete for the right to hire the best manager. So thus, even when the employment contract does not explicitly include a performance bonus, a manager may choose to do a good job of running the firm if he or she wishes to work for another firm at some future date. Okay. So and then potential for take over. There's another external forces that provides manager with an incentive to maximize profit is the threat of a takeover. So if a manager is not operating the firm in a profit maximizing manner, investor will attempt to buy the firm and replace management with new managers who will. By installing a better manager, the firm's profit will rise and the value of the firm's stock will increase. That's one cost to a manager of doing a poor job of running the firm is the increased likelihood of a takeover. So to avoid paying this cost, manager will work harder than they otherwise would, even if they are paid only a fixed salary. Okay. So when we introduce a principal agent problem, the owner of the firm was viewed as having different objective from the manager. So there is nothing special about the owner-manager relationship that gave rise to the principal agent problem. Indeed, there is a similar problem between the manager and employee she or he supervises. So see this, suppose the manager is being paid a fraction of profit and thus has an incentive to increase the firm's profit. So the manager cannot be in several places at the same time and thus cannot monitor every worker even he or she wanted to. So the worker on the other hand would just as soon gossip or drink coffee or as work. So how can the manager induce the workers not to push them, okay, or to force them? Yeah, this is some solution. Okay, you can see from here. Okay, profit sharing, revenue sharing, piece rates and time clock and spot check. Okay. So one mechanism that the manager can use to enhance workers' effort is profit sharing. So making the workers' compensation dependent on underlying profitability of the firm. So offering workers' compensation that is tied to underlying profitability provides an incentive for workers to put forth more effort. Okay, and then another mechanism you can see from here is okay, another revenue sharing. Revenue sharing. Okay. For example, of this type of incentive scheme include tips and sales commission. And then food servers usually receive a very low wage plus tips. So tips are simply a commission paid by the person being served. So if the server does a terrible job, that tip is low. If the server does an excellent job, the tip usually is higher. So similarly, car salesperson and insurance agent usually receive a percentage of the sales they generate. So the idea behind all of this compensation scheme is that it is difficult, if not impossible, for manager to monitor these people's efforts, and there is uncertainty regarding what final sales will be. So by making these workers' income dependent on their performance, the manager give workers an incentive to work harder they otherwise would. Okay, and by working harder, they benefit both the firms and themselves. So revenue sharing is particularly effective when worker productivity is related to revenue rather than cost. For example, a restaurant manager can design a contract whereby server can get some fraction of a tip, and the tip is presumed to be an increasing function of service quality or productivity. So the manager of a sales firm can provide incentive to employees by paying them a percentage of the sales they generate. So in contrast, a retail store that hire a security guard to prevent shoplifting will likely find revenue sharing with the security guard to be ineffective. So his productivity is much more strongly related to the store's cost compared to its revenue. Okay. So one problem with revenue-based incentive scheme is that they do not provide an incentive for workers to minimize cost. For example, a food server may attempt to collect a big tip by offering the customer larger portions, free drinks, okay, and the like, which will enhance the tip at the expense of the restaurant cost. Okay, and then piece rate. Okay. So piece rate as an alternative compensation method is to pay worker based on a piece rate rather than on a fixed hourly wage. For example, by paying a data entry clerk a fixed amount per word entered into the firm's database. So the payment to the clerk depends on the output produced. Okay. So to earn more money, the clerk must enter more word into the firm's database during a given time period. Okay. And many firms use time clock to assist manager in monitoring workers. However, time clocks are generally not useful in addressing the principal agent's problem. Okay. Time clock essentially are designed to verify when an employee arrive and depart or go back to home. So they do not monitor effort. Rather, they simply measure presence of the at the workplace at the beginning and at the end of the workday. So more useful mechanism for monitoring worker is for a manager to engage in spot check of the workplace. So in this case, the manager enter the workplace from time to time to monitor workers. So spot check allow the manager to verify not only that worker are physically present, but also that worker effort and quality of the work are satisfactory. So in conclusion, the optimal method for acquiring input depends on the nature of transaction costs, and specialized nature of the input being procured. Okay, and to overcome the principal agent problem, principal must devise plan to align the agent's interest with the principal. Okay, so in this chapter we examine the optimal institutional choice for input procurement and the principal agent problem as it relates to managerial compensation and worker incentive. So the manager must decide which inputs will be purchased from other firms and which input the firm will manufacture itself. So spot exchange generally is the most desirable alternative when there are many buyers and sellers and low transaction costs. It's become less attractive when substantial specialized investment generate opportunism, resulting in transaction costs associated with using a market. So when a market transaction costs are high, the manager may wish to purchase input from a specific supplier using a contract, or alternatively forgo the market entirely and have the firm set up a subsidiary to produce the required input internally. So in a fairly simple contracting environment, a contract may be the most effective solution, but as the contracting environments become more complex and maybe some situation that you can't expect, internal production through vertical integration become an attractive managerial strategy. So the chapter also demonstrated a solution to the principal agent problem. Reward must be constructed so as to induce the incentive desired for a worker. For example, if all a manager wants from a worker is for the worker to show up at the workplace, an hourly wage rate and a time clock form an excellent incentive scheme. So if it is desirable to produce a high level of output with very little emphasis on quality, piece rate pay scheme work well. So however, if both quantity and quality of output are concerned, so profit sharing is an excellent motivator. Okay, so that's all for the chapter number 6. Okay, thank you very much.